Minister Freeland, thank you for making the time. Appreciate it.
It is great to be with you, Rose.
Nice to see you. You've said in this update that you are exercising prudence, that you're going to keep your powder dry in case things get really bad in the economy, so that you have the firepower to support people going forward. Are you prepared to do stimulus spending if there is a recession? Is that something that you have in mind already?
Sure. I mean, I think that the message from this fall economic statement was our government is striking a balance. This is a responsible fiscal position, and there's also a lot of compassion there to help people who need it right now. There is an acknowledgement that we are in a really uncertain time in the world economy, and what I want Canadians to really take comfort from is that Canada enters that uncertain time from a real position of strength. A position of strength because the job market is so strong. We now have, just numbers released on Friday, 513,000 more jobs than when COVID hit. That's 117% job recovery. That is huge. To me, that means so much in the lives of Canadians.
Yeah.
And strongest GDP growth in the G7. And, as you said, fiscal firepower, we're keeping it dry.
Yeah.
We have a very strong fiscal position. We don't know for sure what's going to happen in the world economy. No one does.
But tell me this,
we can be there.
What are you going to look for to trigger further support? Is it the worst case scenario that you laid out in the update? Is it something even worse than that? What will you be watching for to know that you need to intervene further?
We're going to watch two things. One is what happens with the job situation.
Right.
And for me, that is the single most important indicator. That's why I mentioned it.
Right.
Because, you can talk about recession all you want. You can talk about GDP numbers. But a person doesn't really think about that every day. What a person thinks about is, do I have a job or not? And does my job pay me enough for my family to do well? So the strong jobs numbers today are just they're like life jackets in the Canadian boat as we're in this storm. That's number one.
Okay.
Number two, we are going to be watching GDP. We're going to see how much the Canadian economy and the global economies are slowing down.
Okay, on taxes and this idea by the Conservatives that you freeze CPP increases and EI premiums. Let's put that aside because you've talked about how you think those things are necessary, those increases, especially heading into a slowdown. But the carbon tax, is there merit to the idea of considering pausing it, freezing it for a period of time so that people don't feel that in the immediate?
Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. Because the price on pollution is revenue neutral. Government revenues were strong, have been strong so far this year. I talked about that yesterday. Not because of the price on pollution. I know that you read the fall economic statement. You saw in the price on pollution section, 100% of that money goes back to Canadians.
Yeah, but they still have to spend it. They still have to spend it. They get it back quarterly now, but they still have to spend it.
Well, but people are getting those checks. I got my check a couple of weeks ago. People get the check in their bank account or in the mail.
Yeah.
8 out of 10 Canadians in provinces that have the backstop are getting back more money than they spend. So that is totally revenue neutral, a really, really important point.
So there's no idea that the Conservatives have put forward that you're willing to consider?
I think that if you look at the recipes that the hard right have right now for the economic situation in the world, you don't have to look very far. Just look across the Atlantic. We saw a government that did what the hard right is talking about here in Canada, which is slash taxes. And you saw the market reaction. The British pound did a nosedive. British pension funds almost went belly up in Canada. After I tabled my fall economic statement on Thursday, after markets closed, Moody's came out with a report, the ratings agencies. They reaffirmed Canada's AAA rating with a stable outlook. So right now, what Canada needs is a responsible, balanced approach with compassion for the people who need it, because there are people who really need help.
It's interesting to me that you call the Conservative Party the hard right now, but I'll put that aside for a moment because I want to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. Part of it, what's here, is in response to what has happened in the United States and getting to a green transition, something I know the government's doing in different ways. But the United States has invested $369 billion in this plan. Does this response, coupled with the things that you've already done, get you anywhere close to being competitive to what the United States is trying to do?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for how you framed the question, because we didn't discover climate change and climate action yesterday. We've been working on this very consistently and very seriously since 2015. We have been doing a lot. You talked about the price on pollution, very important Canadian mechanism. We have been investing in the 21 budget and the 22 budget. You know, you saw the net zero accelerator. That is money that is being put to work right now. My colleague and friend, Francois Philippe, it's like every day he has a new announcement. That's because of money that we have already set aside to do that. Having said that, for sure, from my perspective, some of the most important things we announced yesterday were the hydrogen tax credit, the clean tech tax credit. We have the CCUS tax credit. That is also going to be a major engine of climate action and of investment and jobs in Canada. There is more to come.
Are you worried, though, that the United States is becoming aggressively competitive, trying to invest all the capital there and potentially leaving us with, you know, the very little that remains? Because it's a very aggressive move that the president has undertaken.
I'm not worried at all, actually. I'm actually excited, because I think what we're seeing, and what I think we really have seen in the world over the past 12 months, is the main economies of the world, the US, Europe, really taking the green industrial transition seriously. Canada is too. We are extremely well positioned as a country to be a leader here, because we have three things: talented people, natural resources, and the geological formations to do this. Like CCUS, Alberta is built to be the place in the world where CCUS happens, and we have a manufacturing base. So we are the country that is going to set the pace here. I accept that the government has to be there. The one other thing that I'm very excited about is the Canada Growth Fund. That is going to be up and running before Christmas, $15 billion to begin with, and it is all about bringing in private capital for the green transition.
Balanced budget. This is a government that has previously ran on, we're going to run deficits. We don't have an issue with it. Now it seems a significant political pivot that in the future is no longer something you want. You're going to have balanced budgets. Why that shift? Is that something you are actively pursuing? Is it a political response?
Absolutely not. The fiscal track that we showed in our baseline scenario, that wasn't political. That was about sound economic management. And that was really about keeping our powder dry. Because that baseline scenario is built on the average of forecasts of private sector economists that they made in September. We know, though, that there are people in the world who are more pessimistic than that. And since September, I would say there have been some events around the world that have made people think, you know, there are some downside risks. And that's why in the fall economic statement, we presented also a downside risk scenario.
Sure.
And the job there is really kind of to stress test our finances. And the result is an encouraging one, that really, come what may, Canada is going to get through this. We have the economic strength, the fiscal firepower.
I believe you that it's economic. I believe what you're saying, but I also am not naive. I know that there are attacks politically on the government and that there is sensitivity to those attacks for not being fiscally responsible. So I'm just trying to push you back a little bit, I guess, on the notion that this is not also political, that this is not also to reassure Canadians that this is a government and that you are a finance minister who knows how to be prudent with spending.
I do want to reassure Canadians. And what I want to reassure Canadians of is, at this time of real anxiety that people are feeling with their family finances, and I would say even greater anxiety, and I'm sorry to say this, when people turn on the news, I think it's worrying what people are hearing, and probably more worrying what they're hearing from outside Canada than from inside Canada. And one of the jobs that I wanted to do with this document is to say, we've got this, we're gonna be okay. And that is just so true. And it wasn't just a job with the document, it was a job with managing the public finances. Because, you know, it rolls off the tongue to say there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, But that's actually true. People
Yeah.
just don't know for sure what's going to
Sure.
happen. And I think the right thing to do in a situation like that is make sure Canadians are okay, make sure they have jobs, give the people who need it the most some support, but also be careful. Have the money there in case really bad things happen.
Right. So it's not political in any way.
Not from me.
There has been criticism from the Conservatives on the Bank of Canada and from the NDP, as you know. Particularly, though, and that's what's interesting about it, because one on the right, one on the left, about the acceleration or the aggressive move to try and reduce the inflation target down to 2%. Are you worried about that it is happening too quickly at a time when interest rates are also going up, and that is creating a clash that is very difficult for Canadians? And are you worried that the bank has become too aggressive in its pursuit of that 2% inflationary target?
One thing that I'm not going to do is make the Bank of Canada's job any harder.
Right.
Number one challenge in Canada today economically is to get inflation down. And the Canadian institution that has the job of doing that is the Bank of Canada. Very, very wisely, Canadians decided more than 3 decades ago that it's hard. It's hard to keep inflation under control, and it's so hard. We're going to give that job to an independent, non-political institution.
Yes, but you set the target. You give the Bank of Canada a mandate.
We set the target, and I think we did something important and useful with our mandate. You know, our every 5 years that mandate is renewed, and with the mandate renewal, we said your core job is inflation. But you know what? Employment is something we want you to keep an eye on too. And I think that's exactly the right place. That was where our government said what we need to say. And now, look, I understand. Things are tough for Canadians. Inflation is a challenge. And no one likes it when interest rates get higher. That's painful too. And so if you're a politician who's not in government, you want to blame somebody. My job, though, is to keep the Canadian economy in as strong and protected a position as possible. And one of the ways I do that is by really respecting the independence of Canadian institutions, very much including the Bank of Canada.